Good to see everybody. Who is hosting tonight from my colleague? Caitlin. Caitlin Belair.
Hi.
Thank you for hosting.
Of course.
It is almost 8 o'clock. So let me know, Caitlin, are people still joining?
We do have a few more people joining.
Okay, good. Well, I'm very grateful for everybody who's on the call. And it's so good to see you all.
I should go bring my book.
So we'll just give it one more minute and then we are going to start for an on-time departure at 8 o'clock. So I think we will start now. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining this. The second session of TE Reads. There's a lot of energy and emotion in the air, obviously. So I just want to name some of that energy. There's, of course, the emotion and energy of the election and the post-election. And there is the energy and the motion of the fact that we're actually now in the middle of sitting Shiva for Rabbi Sachs. As you know, he passed away on Shabbos, and he was laid to his eternal rest on Sunday. And here it is Wednesday night, and we're in the middle of the week of Shiva, and we're doing the second session of TE Reads. It also was very sudden. Rabbi Sachs made an appearance in September. He did a Zoom call with different federations in North America about his book, and he was interviewed by a federation leader in New York, and he was as wise and thoughtful and soulful and beautiful as could be. That was September. And then October, he withdraws from public life and the announcement is made that he's fighting cancer. And November, he passes away. And so the suddenness of it and the finality of it, his daughter Gila spoke at the funeral on Sunday, and she began by saying, "I'm not ready for this. I'm just not ready for this." And I think that takes in a lot of the world. So with all that emotion, election, the post-election, and the fact that he is that we're sitting Shiva for him, I want to tee up our conversation tonight about these 3 chapters by servicing 3 different questions, which we'll get to, but I'll just frame them out. The first question is, it's almost scary how cosmically he channels the nervous energy of our age in his conversation about de Tocqueville and democracy. And he talks about how de Tocqueville said that what's interesting about Americans is everyone retreats into their own little zip code. And when people retreat into their own little zip code, they don't share anything. They don't share a country. They don't share values. And what de Tocqueville talks about and Rabbi Sachs picks up on is that when that happens, we lose our liberty. So I'm reading this page and we'll take a look at that, but we'll just talk about his conversation, as this is in the chapter From We to I, on what light that sheds on the current moment. That's going to be one question. Second question is, I'm going to want to talk to you about his chapter on family. I had a challenge with his chapter on family, and I wanted to surface that challenge. And to me, it evinces a deeper issue, and a beautiful thing, which is to be able to be in a loving dialogue with somebody who you really disagree with in a very deep way, or to be in a loving dialogue with somebody who has a moral blind spot and they can't see you in important ways. And to me, reading this chapter on family surfaced that. And then the third issue, and then that'll be our hour, is, Jonathan Sachs lived and died in 72 years and really mattered. And I want to ask you to think about what his passing says to you about how you live your own life in a way that matters. That'll be our closing question. William James said the best use of a life is to invest that in something, spend your life on something that will outlive you. Spend your life on something that will outlast you. Spend your life on something that will still be here when you're gone. And Rabbi Sachs, of course, did that so powerfully. And I want to ask you to think about what his example means to us as we live our own lives. So those are our three issues. Let's start with the most painful and heart-throbbing issue first. If you're like me, I can't sleep at night. I get up. It's at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and I'm just terrified that our democracy is actively dying. I'm terrified that our democracy is actively dying. And I just wake up in such a cold sweat and don't know what to do. And that we're at real risk of the authoritarian phase of our country. And page 82 diagnoses it. So what I want to do is just read a page. Just, we're on Zoom. If we were together, I'd have different people read it, but just so that we're on the same page. Page 82, and he's talking about de Tocqueville, who sees a feeling which disposes each American citizen to isolate himself from the mass of his fellows, so that having created a small company for its use, he willingly leaves society at large to itself, right? So by the way, I just totally plead guilty to that. I completely seclude myself at 385 Ward Street, and that's my life, okay? De Tocqueville saw this as the single greatest danger to democratic freedom in the long run. I'm reading on page 82. People would simply cease to interest themselves in the welfare of others, and they would leave that responsibility to the state, which would grow ever larger until it became a kind of benign tyranny. Each of them living apart is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to, but does not see them. He touches them, but he does not feel them. He exists only in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. De Tocqueville foresaw the risks of what I described in the introduction as outsourcing. People would leave everything that did not concern them personally to the state, and this would eventually lead to the end of democratic freedom. Heart pound. The only thing that protected America from this outcome was the strength of its families, communities, churches, and charitable organizations. In other words, its moral environments, where people actively cared for one another. De Tocqueville's warning still echoes today. Lose those environments of face-to-face encounter where the moral sense is exercised, and eventually you will lose liberty. One last paragraph. The sociologist, one of the pioneers of the discipline, was Emil Durkheim. In his work, Suicide, Durkheim argued that in any society in a state of anomie, that is, lacking a shared moral code. Just look at the electoral landscape of our country since 2000. Red in the heartland, blue on the coasts. Has not changed. Lacking a shared moral code, there would be a rise in suicide. He did not see how a society could survive the loss of what he called something collective, the unifying body of ideas, beliefs, and attitudes that give shape and coherence to our shared social world. Not only would society fragment, but so too would individuals, and many of them would be unable to cope. That, I believe, is what is happening in our time. So, page 82 just feels like a very haunting premonition, a very haunting foreshadowing of what's happening to our world. And I wanted to invite your thoughts and comments, what you thought about it and how it made you feel. And if you feel free to send in the chat function to Caitlin that you'd like to speak, and then Caitlin can call on people. So everyone, if I'm missing hands because we have enough people that I might not be able to see everybody. So send a private message to Caitlin in the chat that you would like to speak. And if you would like to speak, we would all love to hear you. That's the first question. Your view of de Tocqueville as Rabbi Sachs presents him, and what that says about our current moment. While you're thinking, I'll just say the reason this resonated for me was that in the middle of the night, when I fear that, the Nazis are coming, that the election will not be upheld, that we'll go on to have a dictatorship, I actually console myself and then kick myself for consoling myself by saying, well, they'll probably leave Temple Emmanuel alone. Which, by the way, with any sense of history, they don't. They don't leave Temple Emmanuel alone. But the sense that people retreat into their own little view, and therefore they just retreat. What can I do? What can I do? That's page 82. And by the way, that's where we are right now. That's where we are right now. You have a Secretary of State who says there's going to be a second term. You have a refusal to do basic orderly transfer of power. That is happening. And that's so terrifying and it's so alarming that it is very tempting to just retreat into our own little what's on Netflix tonight. So anyone have any comments? If not, I'm happy to move on to the next one, but I just wanted to lift this up. I thought that Rabbi Sachs was prophetic. Any comments here? Yes, Charlene Finkel. Charlene, please unmute. Charlene, if you can please unmute, then I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Oh, I think the last thing we should do is retreat into a bubble. I think that would absolutely be the worst thing that we should do. And that we should speak up and do everything we can to try to change this situation. And I think of Elie Wiesel, who says, silence is complicity.
Right.
And so I just think that would be the worst thing to do.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Charlene. All I'm saying is it is what we're dealing with is so terrifying. So heart-poundingly terrifying. So heart-poundingly terrifying that the Secretary of State, who's supposed to be a paladin of international law, says there will be a second term. It's going to be orderly. Now, don't be alarmed. That's very Nazi. That's very Nazi. Very Nazi. And that's so terrifying that a Secretary of State would say that it can cause people to just shrivel up inside. I think you're 100% right. That's the wrong move. But what's helpful to me about this, Charlene, is that de Tocqueville and Rabbi Sachs, in bringing him to us, is naming a problem. And therefore, we have to be intentional about it. Stacy Grossman, I would love to hear you.
I have a question. I've been also terrified about this latest tyrannical effort by Donald Trump and how complicit senators, Republican senators, have been in support of his fantasy of the election being rigged. But aren't there laws in place? I mean, didn't Joe Biden say that on January 20th, if Donald Trump is still in the White House, we will forcibly remove him and he will be brought up on charges of treason? And there are laws in place that will be enforced, and may he rot in jail, no offense. So aren't we in a dialogue, and aren't people thinking about this, and aren't there plans in place among folks in the Biden camp that are ready for the worst case scenario?
Okay, so, right. So and thank you for that question, Stacy. I sure hope you're right. Let me just call on some folks. Dr. Solomon, you said you'd like to speak to the changes made today with regard to the Pentagon staff.
No, it actually is a good follow-on to the points that Stacy just made. We would like to think that there are enforceable laws that would lead to the steps that she described. But as of today, the president, in a truly fascist attempt, has displaced some of the people who are guarding the walls in the Pentagon with sycophants who are voted to him in positions of making power. So if you think about the military being our last defense against this, which is what we've been told by General Stavridis and others over the past few days, Trump is now trying to checkmate that. And I think should be starting to lose sleep because I'm very fearful of where this is going. And
Right.
one last point, let me just finish. I'm not comfortable calling the middle of our country the heartland anymore. I don't think that's an appropriate description. It's the center of the country geographically, but it's a long way from the heartland.
Fair enough. I was just describing the middle part of the country. But that, I mean, I think Dr. Solomon, your response to Stacy is what keeps me up at night. If our system were functioning properly with appropriate checks and balances, you're absolutely right. But he has systematically tried to undermine the checks and balances. And he has systematically fired people like, you know, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, who does not want to sick the American military and the American people. And he's going to get some sycophant who will. That is very Nazi. That is very Nazi. And so, yeah, it's a super scary situation. Let me just call in a few more people. There's Michael Gardner and then Maayan.
Hi, thanks, Wes. Stacy, I think the problem is that structurally, our country is not set up to quite handle it the way you're suggesting. Because I think, as many people know, and you might know as well, under the Constitution, it appears, it's not certain, but it appears that the state legislatures have the ultimate say about who is designated an elector to the Electoral College. So notwithstanding, while the tradition has certainly been that the electors follow the vote, it's not absolutely required. And if the state legislators determine that they want to seat a different slate of electors, they have the constitutional right to do that. Given that we have a Supreme Court made up now of a majority or close to a majority of strict constructionists, I'm not sure there's much comfort to be found in the Supreme Court should that issue come before the Supreme Court and should they find legislators willing to do that. I think what Trump is about is trying to find a couple of swing state Republican-held legislatures that he can convince, because indeed the most recent poll found that 70% of Republicans believe that the election was not fair and free. So he can go to the base of these Republican legislators and say, hey, look, if you want to survive and you're as a legislator again, your own base is telling you that the election wasn't fair. You have the constitutional right to submit a different slate of electors, and you ought to do that. I think that's the great dilemma we're facing. And the structure of our Constitution, I'm afraid to say, makes that a possibility that we just hadn't had to confront before. So that's an awful scenario. Wes, I know you have all along have said, we need to reach out to people we have these tremendous disagreements with. And let me just say, as much as I hate to say it, and it's really been bothering me and I've been thinking about it a lot, but I'm increasingly find it difficult to be in relationship with the apparently millions of people who are of the view that this election, notwithstanding the absence of any evidence to support that view, was not free and fair, and therefore it's appropriate to take steps of the kind I just mentioned to undo the vote. I don't know, Wes.
Michael, what I said was that to people who voted for different candidates, to me, that should not break a relationship. And I stand by. One votes for this candidate, one votes for that candidate. They are both deeply held views that love should transcend that. But this issue is a different issue. This issue is a different issue, and I agree with you. There's people who say, I'm good with dictatorship. I'm good with being ruled over by a strongman. I'm good with somebody acting in ways that no U.S. president has ever acted. We faced this issue today when I sent out that email, the clergy statement, which was, would we be prepared if somebody said, I'm for authoritarians, I'm for strongmen, I'm for elections that are thrown out because my candidate didn't win, and therefore Temple Emmanuel is not a safe space for me. And we got, 98% of the response to the email was thank you, and I'm losing sleep, and thank you. We got two people who said they're for strongmen. And I don't have the answer to how you maintain a relationship with somebody there were Jews who voted for Adolf Hitler. Let me just say that. There were Jews who voted for Adolf Hitler, and he rewarded them with the crematoria. So I don't really know what to say about people, Jews, who are, a blink of an eye away from the Holocaust in memory. From 1945 to 2020 is like that. And for Jews, many people on this call were alive during the Holocaust. All of us know people who survived the Holocaust. All of us have been educated about the Holocaust. For Jews not to be sensing the tremendous danger in this move. This is very different from, the election was kid stuff. The election was a picnic in the park. You vote for Biden, you vote for Trump, that I can handle. But the election is resolved. 7 million or 5 million more people voted for Biden. He won the election fair and square. We're going to throw it out because we're comfortable with a strongman. That's I don't have the answer to how you make a community out of that. I think this is going to be a very hard moment for lots of ways, including that one. Anyway, one of the questions that I got, Ellen Cass asked, I'm not exactly sure what Wes is asking. So Ellen, here's what I'm asking. What I'm asking is that we name this problem. And what I'm asking is that, you can't deal with your alcoholism until you say, I am an alcoholic. That's the first step in the AA. And I think we as a country need to do the moral equivalent of that in this case, which is our democracy is an act of dying. Our democracy is, Dr. Solomon was on the call, it's on the ICU. Our democracy is in an emergency room somewhere. That's where it is. Okay. And we're the nervous family waiting to see if our democracy is going to make it. I don't really know what we do given the kinds of dangers that Michael mentioned. But I will say that, I'm most concerned, like when Mitch McConnell says, don't be alarmed, then I'm really alarmed.
Yeah.
That's very work makes freedom. That's very work makes freedom. That's a classic Nazi move, to use rhetoric like that. Softer work makes freedom, which was on the gate to Auschwitz. Don't be alarmed. That's very alarming. Let me just, so I don't have the answer, but it was just haunting to me that before he died.
Wes, there's something wrong with your internet connection.
Can you not hear me?
I can hear.
There's something wrong with your internet connection. No, you're freezing.
Oh,
There you go.
Caitlin, can you help me out here?
Martin, I actually think it's your connection, not Wes's, because
Yeah.
you're freezing on our end. So you might want to check your Wi-Fi and then go closer to your router.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to just surface the fact that this great rabbi had said this. Let me pivot to the third part of this conversation. I think this is an urgent moment in history. And one of the things that I want to ask you to think about now in the year 2020, with all this happening, and with Rabbi Sacks's, untimely death is, how do you want to spend the rest of your days in a way that really matters? And to me, that's always an important question. It is a question that really flows from Rabbi Sachs's book and his example. But the combination of his book and his death and this period, I just want to surface what are your thoughts for how we can live our lives most meaningfully and most impactfully? And if anyone has any, then feel free. So Stacy, thank you for saving me again. And then Ellen after that. And then please, because I only have one screen on at a time, if you'd like to share, I'd love that. We'd love that. Please chat that up to Caitlin. Stacy.
Okay, and this is going to be my last input because I don't want to hog it up. But one of the things that I've been talking with my kids about is how important it is for us to continue to stay engaged. We need to have conversations. We need to be active. We need to be a part of a protest. We need to be a part of putting out truth. We need to stand up against fake news and propaganda and tyranny and dictatorship. We need to call Trump someone who is trying to become a dictator, a despot. We need to name it, and we need to engage in conversation. And I think that I feel really compelled to shrink and to isolate and to want to, be insular, but we have to do the opposite. We have to have conversations, and we have to speak the truth and name it, and fight.
Yes, and by the way, thank you, Stacy and Ellen. That was the answer to your question. What did I want? What was I asking you to do? Just that. That is to say, the reason I brought page 82 was that it conveys the temptation to shrink and to just contract. And what we need to do, as Stacy said, is just the opposite. So Ellen, you're next. And then I think Marty Paley has graciously agreed to share.
Think that Stacy just said exactly what I had wanted to say, but much more eloquently. I think part of what I'm getting out of the book is the importance of relationships that are deep, that are real, that are meaningful. And while I am terrified by what's happening in our country today, and I hear what you're saying about not necessarily being able to engage with people on the other side, I think part of the issue is they probably don't have any desire to engage with us either. And I think that at some point, I mean, right now, I think we're in a horrible situation, and it scares me. But I don't have the solution for that. I know Stacy's right. We have to stand up. We have to say what's important to us, and we have to fight for it. But down the road, we're going to have to learn to have those dialogues, to try to form the relationships with the people who, I mean, 72 million people.
Right. I mean, that's what
we're wrong at some level, or they thought we were wrong. I don't know. It's hard to believe.
Right. When Rabbi Sachs, he says, he quotes Durkheim, a state of enemy lacking a shared moral code. That's what that is. That there are some people, many people on this call think about firing this military person and firing that military person so that he can stay on, even though we lost the election. And we just think that's code red. And other people have a different moral code and say that's okay. That's a lack of a shared moral code. I don't have the answer to it, but I think it's very important to name it and to name that we don't shrink. I wanted to get Marty Paley is our next speaker, and then Ma'ayan, and then Al Kaplan. So Marty Paley.
Thank you. Two basic truths from our tradition. One is the Tikkun Olam, which is supposed to be repairing yourself before you can start repairing the world. And sometimes people don't realize that. And the second one is that Al Shlosha Devarim, that the world rests on three things: Torah study, prayer, and acts of loving kindness. And so those are the foundations of what I think that we need to do, because they will encourage us to act in the community in the proper way and keep our focus as Jews.
Thank you, Marty. Mayan.
So my problem is, I agree with you. We have to name the problem, name the issue. And for the life of me, I can't do that. I feel completely impotent. I don't understand why everybody is kowtowing to him. I don't understand why he is able to do whatever he wants without anybody standing up to him and stopping him. And as far as and without being able to name that, I can't get over the fact that I don't believe what's happening. I don't understand what's happening, and I don't know what to do with it.
Right. Right. That is to say, I mean, to just take a different gloss on what you just said. When Richard Nixon was doing what he was doing, Senate Republicans said no. And Senate Republicans held him accountable. When Trump says, I'm not, I didn't lose, it was stolen, the Republican senators who lead millions of people who are put in power again, enable him to do it. So it's a breakdown of it's the breakdown of a moral code. It's the breakdown of a country. And it's one of the other problems we have is, well, just to bring an analogy from a much more pleasant world, for those of you who were watching Queen's Gambit about the chess prodigy, I was talking to somebody whose child was a state chess champion. And they said that the chess at that level is all about pattern recognition. The people who are chess masters, what they read are books of chess games. Like they read books of chess games and they have all the moves in their head. And they know that in this game in 1974 in Moscow, this guy moved that way. And they have that all in their head, just pattern recognition. And one of the problems that we have here, Maayan, is there's no pattern recognition. Because we have no pattern recognition. No president has ever done this. No secretary of state has ever done this. No, no Senate majority leader has ever done this. There's no pattern recognition. And the only pattern that we see is a Nazi pattern. It's a Nazi pattern. The pattern that we see is 1930s Germany. We just don't have anything in our American story to equip us to handle this. Al Kaplan, you are next, my friend.
Yeah. I understand that Rabbi Sachs lived in Great Britain.
Yes.
I understand that there are problems with anti-Semitism in Great Britain.
Yes.
Maybe we can learn from how Rabbi Sachs reacted to the problem of anti-Semitism in Great Britain as a model for how we can handle the current situation.
Al, you're fabulous. Actually, if you want to be inspired, I feel really bad about this class, by the way, because one of the things that Rabbi Sachs talked about, and actually it's in the email that he sent Paul Greenberg, which I sent to the congregation. He sends this email, which I can read it to you, and I am just so violating. In this class on Rabbi Sachs, I am so violating Rabbi Sachs, but he writes this to Paul, who's on the call. Elijah has to learn that God is not in the whirlwind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in the still small voice. Failing to learn this, God tells him to appoint a successor. And then Rabbi Sachs concludes, the protest that works best is delivered gently, positively, reasonably, and always with hope. And I'm feeling quite crushed and I'm feeling quite shattered that I'm 0 for 4. It's delivered gently. I'm talking about Nazis. It's delivered positively. I'm talking about Nazis. It's delivered reasonably. And I'm talking about my heart beating and I can't sleep at night. And it's always with hope. And it's hard to find that hope now. But I want to just respond out to what you said after acknowledging my manifold failures here. that his daughter Gila spoke. And what she said was, it was a very short eulogy and totally powerful. She said that she was talking to somebody the day before the funeral who said, maybe COVID cannot be solved. Maybe it's got to be managed. And she said that's when her father's voice came to her, and she realized how her father had shaped her, that was the opposite of how her father thought. Her father thought that the more serious the problem, the more intractable the problem, the greater our determination must be to solve it. And then she quoted specifically, Al, global anti-Semitism. And she said her dad always believed that global anti-Semitism could be stamped out. And the joke in the family was that if you bumped into her dad in the kitchen while he was waiting for the water to boil for his tea, he would say to you, he's got a new move on combating global anti-Semitism. So I think that I don't have the solution and I don't have hope, but I do think that that kind of attitude of we're never going to give up and we're never going to be satisfied and we're going to be relentless in preserving our democracy, I think that is what we have to learn from Rabbi Sacks. I want to apologize to Laura Becker. Laura, I think I had missed your comment, so I would love to invite your comment.
Well, I mean, I'm asking you as a lawyer. My understanding is that as of the middle of December, all states have to certify their elections. And my way of thinking is that no state is going to go against the popular vote. It will not. So I think I think that our anxieties are about a crazed man. He's not crazy, but he's crazed. And he loves the fact that he's doing this to us. And I think we need to be strong and rely on the systems in place that, I mean, there are many, many levels of actions that can occur between now and the middle of January. And I think the middle of December will be an important one.
Well, Laura, all I can say is I pray that you are right. Thank you. Annette Miller, you're next. Annette, if you can please unmute.
Unmute, just a sec. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Yes, okay. So thank you very much for opening this discussion for us. I am hardly ever an optimist, and I can't call myself an optimist now, but I think we have to see that we did win, and we have to begin to concentrate. Oh dear, now I've been getting some phone call. We have to begin to concentrate on the fact that we won and what our strengths are. I think that we have to continue the fight, and sorry, I'm getting a phone call of all things. Okay, so I think more of what I'm a little concerned about is that if you read on, or in the part of this chapter as well, was that he spoke about the importance of relationships and the importance of one-to-one relationships, and the fact that so much is happening on email and Zoom and texting as opposed to conversations. There was a whole discussion that he had about that. And the thing that frightens me now is that because of this pandemic, we are not given an opportunity to truly relate and build close relationships the way he said that we have to. We're almost getting a double whammy here. We're being like sort of almost cut off at the knees, you might say. I don't know what the expression is, but realizing now that we have to connect more, that we have to be more of a we, more thou than I and me. And yet we are confronted with this pandemic now, which is not letting us be in touch, physically in touch with each other. So it almost seems as though we're just going to have to work that much harder to make sure that what we want to happen will happen. I mean, Biden did win, And I think we're going to have to support him even more and even louder than those who manage. We all worked very hard, and he did get the biggest amount of a vote ever given. And I know so did Trump get a large vote, but we did win. So I think maybe this is just another warning for us to keep up the fight.
Well, so Anna, thank you for that. Let me just, you said optimistic. I just wanted to surface an important distinction that Jonathan Sachs makes all the time.
Right, yes.
He talks regularly the difference between hope and optimism.
Right.
What he basically says is optimism is an empty feeling that you think things are going to work out. Hope is action that we take to make it work out. And he says that the Bible is not an optimistic book, but it's the ultimate literature of hope. It is.
So I think we have to take that.
Yeah. So thank you. Anne Sebastian and then Bob Kahn. Anne.
Thank you. First of all, Rabbi Sachs is just amazing. In response to Ellen, I think there's such an urgency to have the conversations now. We can't afford to wait. We have to be proactive and move forward. One of the things that I struggle with is that there are so many people in the Jewish community where we have a shared moral code, who still voted for Trump and who thinks that Trump is right. And how can we parlay that shared moral code with them? And then the other piece of hope that I would like to offer is it is highly doubtful that Trump could and the Supreme Court would be willing to force enough states to change their electors to so that Trump could get an electoral vote. Even if he,
thank you. I hope you're right, Ann. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bob Kahn, I think you're next. Bob.
Hi, Wes. Hello, everyone. So I think there's no doubt there's unscrupulous leadership that is testing our institutions, but I have high level of confidence that our institutions will withstand the test. And I think that it's important to make a distinction between that leadership that's testing our institutions and the people who voted for him. That's literally almost half of the country. And I think it's important not to demonize them. They have different views. I'm not certain at all that they've signed up for the kind of the unscrupulous tactics. And I certainly don't believe that they've signed up for destroying our institutions. So I think that it's really important to keep the lines of communication open, to talk to people who have different views than we do. And, actually looking at what Rabbi Sachs said in terms of the strengths of democracy, family, community, churches, community organizations, the folks in the red states who voted for that guy, they all have that stuff. So I'm not certain, I don't believe that they're looking to destroy society. I understand that the leadership will stop at almost nothing, but I think our institutions are up to that test. And I think that we shouldn't cut off communication with all the folks who voted for him, because I think that I still believe that they believe in democracy.
Bob, thank you. I will just say I agree with you that I have no problem with somebody who voted for the president. It's not how I vote, and I have very, very, very strongly different views on the merits. But I could have Shabbos lunch with the person who voted for the President Trump. I could not have Shabbos lunch with somebody who says, I want to disqualify the election because my guy lost, and who says there was fraud, even though there's no fraud. And that was Michael Gardner's point, Bob. And I pray that you're right. I pray that there would be principled Trump voters who say, I would have preferred him, but he lost, and I'm good with the new president. And that person I would have, for at the Pesach Seder. But I fear that it's more likely if somebody says I voted for Trump, there's somehow they bought it all in. And here, by the way, I don't want to. This is the deepest thing I have to say in my soul. And and again, I'm going to violate Rabbi Sachs's rules about hope. But I just have to say this: when Hitler said Jews are vermin, and Hitler said Jews must be exterminated, and he forged an emotional connection with his listeners, and they didn't interrogate that. And we're not vermin, and we shouldn't be exterminated. But because he said it, they did it, because they forged an emotional connection with the Fuhrer. When Trump says there was fraud, I wish there were a world where Trump voters said, no, there wasn't fraud. There's no basis to that. But I fear that it's more the case that when the Fuhrer says there was fraud, they say, okay, there's fraud, and they don't interrogate it. They're playing on a different field. It's a field of emotion. It's a field of a deep kind of mystical connection. And the usual checks and balances and usual rules of evidence and usual ways of thinking are suspended, and Jews are vermin, and there is fraud, and Jews must be exterminated, and the election must be canceled out because the Fuhrer says so. That's a very real fear.
I just have one follow-on comment to that, and that is, as long as they express themselves by filing lawsuits, I can definitely have Shabbat lunch with them. If after all the lawsuits are exhausted and they say, we're going to disregard that and we're going to take over the institutions, I would join you in drawing that line there. But I think they're filing lawsuits.
Well,
I think that's as far as it's going to go.
I hope you're right, Bob. I hope you are right. Bernard, you would like to ask a question. We'd love to hear you. Bernard, if you could please unmute.
Well, I have several thoughts. First of all, I think his base are the victims of the classical fascist. Power and confidence, lie like hell repeatedly and convincingly, have no empathy, and have absolute brook no dissent from anyone. So they've bought into this. So I feel I can't talk to them because their mind is fixed in what he sold them. That's the package. Secondly, I think because he's incapable of admitting that he's not the greatest and that he's losing, he's thrashing around now and making a lot of noise. And then I thought the Supreme Court had given a ruling recently that when it comes to the electoral votes and the voters don't cast the way they should according to the election, they can be penalized. So I think that Biden has won. There'll be a transition of power. There'll be a lot of noise. The big problem, of course, is after this is all over, the destruction of people's faith in elections and in the government is the problem.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest problem. And of course, the other big elephant in the room, the COVID is rampant and being ignored.
Yeah. By the way, thank you, Bernard. And Dr. Solomon mentioned that as well. And Bob, this goes to your point, and it goes to my point about the Fuhrer, about when the Fuhrer says something, the people's usual rules, right? It's shocking how many people have died from Trump super spreader events. I think, what was Herman Cain? There was a Trump official there was somebody who died from the Oklahoma event. I think it was Herman Cain. And so many people have died from his events, and it's demonstrable. It's demonstrable that his events are super spreaders and people are dying. And yet that does not seem to register. Like the Fuhrer says, it's not a problem, it's not a problem. The Fuhrer says it's going away, it's going away. The Fuhrer says we're going to have a recovery, the likes of which you've never seen before. Then we'll have a recovery, the likes of which, right? And so the usual rules, and you want to say, but wait a minute, people are dying. I mean, Dr. Solomon's things in the chat room, 1,200 people died in the US yesterday from COVID. And, and the numbers are just so large and scary. And yet, again, the Fuhrer spoke, they don't see it. So there's something that's going on with him. Again, pattern recognition. We've never seen this before. He could say it's day when it's night, and they'll say what he said. So that is the intensity of this moment. We're going to just have a couple last comments, and then I will try to wind up on a happy and hopeful note. Paul Kalis. Paul, if you can unmute, please.
Okay. I agree almost completely with what Bob Kahn said to us, but communicating amongst ourselves who are more or less of one mind is no way to change what's happening in the country. We have to communicate with people who don't agree with us. Now, one of the things that politicians admire is power. And from what I understand, letter writing campaigns to politicians, if they're large enough, create some kind of an effect. So I would like to see if something could be arranged that vast numbers of people, mostly on the left, but some on the right, can communicate with the politicians in the red states, as well as the White House, because the volume of mail that comes in is absolutely measured by every politician.
Okay, Paul, thank you. E. Frox. I'm not quite sure who E. Frox is.
It's me, but it's Esther.
Oh, Esther. Okay, Esther.
I see it in a different perspective. He's boxed in. He knows if he's not going to be a president, he's going to be sued from here to the end of the world. So he has no choice. He has to fight because otherwise he's going to sit in jail. So basically, he surrounded himself with reinforcements. He reminds me Mussolini, and that's what it is. It's horrible, and I wish all of us, every single person, will get up and demonstrate and and fight for democracy.
Yeah. So just guys, stay tuned. I mean, I don't know what to ask of you now other than to name the issue, but if it comes to marches and rallies and other kinds of moves, I know that all 5 members of the clergy team will be standing together as one at any of those rallies and marches, and we will be asking you if it comes to it. I hope that the optimists on this call are correct. I hope that the hopeful people on this call are correct. I pray that Bob Kahn is correct. I pray that the optimists are correct. But if not, we will definitely be reaching out. I want to just get one last comment from Joan Katz, and then I'm going to close.
Thank you. One of the worst things I saw about Trump was his assault on the truth. And that's come to pass in spades because the conspiracy theories are abounding. And I think what we need, and this is a legislative step to take, is the regulation of social media. The newspapers are sued because if they write things that are not true, they're accountable. The social media is not. And this is something that it's just, he has used this medium and the other people are using this to such a degree that people do not know what the truth is anymore. People believe that Hillary Clinton is abusing children, sexually abusing them. They don't sound like crazy people. They're crazy ideas, but they believe this. So this is something that it's going to take us years to undo what he has done as far as believing what we hear in the news media.
Yes. Amen to that. So I want to end, given the seriousness and urgency of this moment, on the most hopeful note that I can. And that is, when all else fails, it's just always good to learn Torah and to learn about, we've been working in one of my other classes, I've been reading this book, Leadership in Turbulent Times, Doris Kearns Goodwin. And I have found in the winter of my 59th year that I have absolutely fallen in love in a way that I never could have, how deep, with Abraham Lincoln. And I want to end by bringing up President Lincoln. I mean, his story is just so remarkable. Many of you probably know it, but it's worth reading what Doris Kearns Goodwin talks about. But it's Veterans Day. We're closing out Veterans Day. And on November 19th, 1863 at Gettysburg, the great Abraham Lincoln, and it was just a bloodbath, says the following: "It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth." And that is Lincoln in November of 1863. It's November of 2020. His words are as holy as any Torah scroll, and they're on us. They are on us. Let's do them together. Thank you, folks. Have a good night.